Hello, I'm Dilek Tunay. You're watching A News. Let's see the top stories for the hour. The body of Iran's late supreme leader lies in state in Tehran as Iran begins week of funeral ceremonies. Russia says its forces captured Kostiantynivka in eastern Ukraine, which Kyiv denies. And protests target Germany's far-right AfD party convention. Iran has begun a week of funeral ceremonies for former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, drawing large crowds to Tehran. The events are expected to continue across several cities before his burial later this week.
Thousands of mourners gathered at Tehran's Imam Khomeini Grand Mosala on Saturday as Iran began a week of funeral ceremonies for former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The proceedings opened with the national anthem, Quran recitations and religious tributes. Khamenei's coffin, draped in the Iranian flag and topped with his black turban, was placed beside the coffins of 4 slain family members. Supporters filled the prayer complex, waving Iranian flags and carrying portraits of the former leader.
Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred by the enemies of Islam. He was a unique leader revered by Muslims as well as non-Muslims.
I
have a strange feeling. When my father died, I didn't cry as much as I cried when the Supreme Leader was martyred.
State media showed crowds chanting anti-American slogans and calling for revenge. The funeral follows Khamenei's death in February during the opening airstrike of the US and Israeli-led war against Iran. Iranian officials say representatives from about 100 countries are expected to attend memorial events, including heads of state, ministers and religious figures. Authorities have also introduced temporary flight restrictions and extra traffic measures as they prepare for large crowds throughout the week. Khamenei's coffin will remain in Tehran until Sunday evening before continuing its journey to other religious centres before his burial in Mashhad on Thursday.
A News correspondent Turaj Shiraliliu brings more from Tehran's Grand Musalla prayer hall.
Reporting from the streets leading to Tehran's Grand Musalla, where tens of thousands of mourners have gathered for the public farewell before the burial prayer service of Iran's former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, to be held on Sunday. The week-long processions will continue in multiple cities in Tehran and in Qom and Mashhad, as well as in neighboring Iraq, in the cities of Najaf and Karbala, home to the shrines and mausoleums of Shia Muslim saints. The Grand Ayatollah, who was killed by Israeli-US attacks in February, led Iran for about 4 decades and shaped its domestic and foreign policy longer than any political figure of his generation. On Friday, the state memorial was held with participation of heads of state, parliament speakers, ministers, and special representatives of governments here at the Tehran Musalla Prayer Hall. Ironically, Friday, the 3rd of July, marked the anniversary of shooting down of an Iranian commercial airliner in 1988 by the USS Vincennes, killing all 290 passengers on board, including 66 children. Iranian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that Tehran will never forget unpardonable crime, particularly after the US warship's commander received Medal of Merit. Iran and the US have deferred their mediated technical level talks to end of the funeral procession reportedly to mid-July, amid signs of progress in implementing the 60-day ceasefire agreement. Despite the lull in arms and reported advances in the talks, their verbal war continues. Parliament Speaker and Chief Negotiator in the talks with the US, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, in a post on X, harshly hit back at the US President Donald Trump's hungry nation remarks, accusing him of projecting America's own domestic challenges. He said, "Imagine having 40-something million of your own citizens on food stamps and calling another nation hungry. This is not a proclamation. This is a projection. Keep your supplemental nutrition assistance program advice." rejecting Trump's claim that Iran's unblocked assets under the truce deal will be allocated to buy American food commodities, the speaker added, "Our assets, our choices. Mind your malnutrition rates." Meantime, the week-long massive funeral rites of Ayatollah Khamenei are a demonstration of a post-war political resilience and continuity leading to the leadership of his son. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran, Foreign News.
As we've just seen in our previous stories, world leaders and senior delegations are gathering in Tehran to pay tribute to Iran's late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during state funeral ceremonies. And joining me now is Teresa Duarte Fernandez. She's an expert in international relations from Lisbon. Welcome to the program, Teresa.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you for your invitation.
Now, Tehran's hosting world leaders and senior officials attending the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, beyond these ceremonies themselves, what diplomatic significance do these gatherings carry?
Well, it does show that there is a very strong support from the Axis of Resistance, which is a network that Iran has throughout the region to project its own domestic power. So we have delegations from Hamas, from the Palestinian Jihad, we have delegations from Hezbollah, from Lebanon attending these religious ceremonies. So they are really showing their support for the regime, which has hardened since the U.S. intervention started in February. We have seen that there has been a rotation on the higher levels of this regime, namely the former supreme leader, which is now having its funeral 4 months past these invasions. So it does go to show that there is a strong support from these communities, from these military militias, from these armed groups for this regime, and that this was actually one of the points, if we look in hindsight, of the catalyst for the US intervention in the Middle East. So this can represent a strengthening of a challenge that was once one of the catalysts to start this American intervention in the region. So let's see how the US responds to these ceremonies. Certainly today is not the day that we will see many updates online. The United States are celebrating their 250th anniversary of their Independence Day. So maybe in a couple of days we will see a couple of updates.
Mm-hmm. Now, the high-level delegation returned to the country from Qatar for this ceremony, highly significant for the country, and Iran is expected to resume indirect contacts with the US after the mourning period. How might the funeral temporarily affect diplomatic momentum, do you think?
Well, we're all hopeful that there won't be any attacks, especially during these funeral ceremonies. There has been a public notice from Qatar and from Pakistan that these talks would in fact just resume after the funeral ceremonies have been terminated. And one of the most significant things I think we can notice from these ceremonies is the fact that the current supreme leader of Iran, so the son of the late former supreme leader, is not present due to security reasons. We see many individuals who are directly related with the Iranian government, but not this critical main persona, which we have not seen for quite some time. So that also gives us a little bit of an anticipation, of a little bit of a doubt of what the state of the supreme leader is at the moment. We haven't really seen much of him. Everything that we see from the supreme leader is coming from online communications or via other actors. So I think the most crucial point here is that there is in fact a halt, as we are seeing right now, in terms of attacks. We've been seeing twice already attacks between the United States and Iran. So now it is very important, since all the Iranian delegation, along with the representations from the proxies, are all gathered here for these ceremonies, that attacks do not take place. And conveniently, they are, like I said, on the same day as the American Independence Day. So everything seems to culminate to a point where it's very unlikely that attacks will resume. So if that is the case, it does seem like a good point to address negotiations, hopefully after the, I would say, 9th of July, because there will also be the Ankara summit in Turkey where all the NATO representation will be gathered. So after that, it does seem quite likely that the negotiations will resume, and hopefully the Strait of Hormuz will remain open, and hopefully then it will be possible to address the nuclear issue.
And Teresa, I want to discuss the phone call between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. They've decided to meet in person as a result of those talks. Now, Trump's been publicly critical of Netanyahu in recent weeks. What do you make of this and the timing of this dialogue once again?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that Trump does need to be quite vocal with Netanyahu, because Netanyahu not only, but Israel as a whole can be a stone in Trump's shoe as America is walking towards these negotiations. So as we know, Lebanon is one of the main points in the Memorandum of Understanding. And as we also know, there is Israeli military presence on the south of Lebanon. So this is a very sensitive issue for the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding, even though there is already an agreement signed by the United States, Israel, and Lebanon to start removing the Israeli military presence from Lebanese soil, especially two areas that Netanyahu in his X social media published recently, I think just the beginning of last week, where Netanyahu points to pilot zones, so two test areas where the Israeli forces would start to transit and remove themselves and pass the control to the Lebanese government. But attacks are still going on in this region. So it does seem to me that it is very important that Donald Trump is in fact able to put some sort of control to his biggest ally in the region so that it does not jeopardize the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding. But there's also another point that I would like to really focus on, which is the convenience of this actor in the region. So if, in fact, Trump is able to put a halt to Netanyahu's and the Israeli cabinet's movements, militarily speaking, in the region, America, and in this case, Donald Trump, shows up as a hero, shows up as victorious. But even if Trump is not able momentarily, because this would definitely just happen momentarily, the Israeli government is dependent on the United States in many aspects, economically, militarily, to continue its operations in south of Lebanon, but not only. So if temporarily Donald Trump is not able to put a stop or at least a halt to Israel, there is always an scapegoat. So the Americans can always say that the Memorandum of Understanding did not go forward because someone, not them, someone else was not willing to cooperate. But like I said, this would just happen temporarily. So eventually, sooner or later, even if the US removed its support from Israel, or at least halted it to some extent, then Israel would eventually understand that it is dependent on US support to continue its operation. So either an scapegoat or coming up as victorious in the short term, this is a very convenient situation for the US, because at the end of the day, they can still project power in the region. And using a sentence from Donald Trump, in this relation, Donald Trump holds the cards, which is something that Netanyahu knows he's dependent on, especially because there will be anticipated elections in Israel this year. So we will see what the Prime Minister has to say when he does meet with the President of the US. If I had to guess, I would say that it would be after the 8th and 9th of July.
Okay, Teresa, thank you so much for your analysis today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Now, Russia says its forces have captured Kostiantynivka in eastern Ukraine, with President Vladimir Putin describing the city as strategically important in Moscow's campaign to seize the Donetsk region. The Russian Defense Ministry released footage it said showed its troops raising the Russian flag in the city on Friday. Ukraine's general staff has rejected the claim, saying Kostyantynivka remains under the control of Ukrainian defense forces and that troops continue defensive operations in and around the city. And the spotlight is turning to next week's NATO summit, where allied leaders face growing pressure to strengthen the alliance and maintain unity. A news correspondent Anita Sharma from the Netherlands has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says next week's summit in Ankara must be about turning last year's promises into action. After allies agreed in The Hague to sharply increase defense spending, the focus has shifted to delivery, filling capability gaps, boosting defense production, and proving Europe and Canada can shoulder far more of the alliance's security burden. Leaders from NATO's 32 member states are trying to preserve alliance unity after months of tension with U.S. President Donald Trump over military commitments, Iran, and Washington's long-term role in European security. They hope Trump's strong relationships with Turkey's President Erdogan and Rutte will lead to a smooth summit. Rutte says NATO 3.0 entails Europe and Canada spending another $250 billion on defense. He says that's an unequaled and massive investment and at the limit of what can be spent given staffing and equipment constraints. The increase follows last year's agreement in The Hague to work towards spending 5% of GDP on defense and defense-related investments by 2035. But despite the surge in spending, the biggest uncertainty remains America's long-term commitment. On Thursday, Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. was spending money protecting NATO allies without getting any benefit. He also compared U.S. defense expenditures with the U.K., France, Italy, and Poland, stating that it's ridiculous for the USA to continue along this one-sided path when the relationship is not reciprocal. The test for leaders in Ankara is no longer whether Europe is spending more. It's whether those investments are enough to keep the U.S. fully committed to NATO. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Large protests have erupted in eastern Germany as the far-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD, gathers for a crucial party congress ahead of September's state election. Here's more.
Around 15,000 protesters have taken to the streets of the eastern German city of Erfurt, blocking roads and staging sit-in demonstrations in an effort to disrupt the annual congress of the far-right Alternative for Germany. Police have maintained a heavy presence following warnings of possible clashes, while authorities have urged demonstrators to remain peaceful. The AfD delegates are meeting to elect the party's leadership and prepare for key state elections later this year. Protesters say they want to prevent what they describe as the spread of fascism and stop the Congress from taking place. Many argue Germany has a special responsibility to resist the far right because of its Nazi past, a claim the AfD denies. The Congress comes as the AfD seeks to win its first ever state government in September's election in Saxony-Anhalt, where opinion polls suggest the party could secure an outright majority. A victory would mark the first time the AfD has taken power at state level. The AfD has steadily gained support across Germany since last year's federal election, when it finished second with a record 20.8% of the vote. More recent YouGov polling puts the party at 29% nationally, ahead of Chancellor Friedrich Merz's Conservative Alliance on 20%. The AfD says it represents conservative voters and supports tougher immigration policies. However, all other major parties continue to refuse to work with it under a long-standing political firewall aimed at keeping the party out of government. Meanwhile, Germany's domestic intelligence agency says right-wing extremism remains the country's biggest threat to democracy.
Hundreds have taken to the streets in Hungary's second-largest city, Debrecen, demanding tighter environmental controls after authorities discovered severe pollution linked to a Chinese battery materials plant.
Demonstrators gathered outside Debrecen's City Hall, calling for stricter environmental oversight and for battery factories to leave the area altogether. The rally was triggered by findings that groundwater near Chinese battery supplier Semcorp contained aluminium levels measured at 13,000 times the legal limit, prompting authorities to suspend the company's production license while an investigation continues. Protesters directed their anger at Debrecen Mayor Laszlo Papp, chanting for his resignation and accusing local authorities of failing to protect public health.
The effects of such huge-sized industrial investments are of such weight that the environmental and social effects of them should not be measured and analysed locally.
We would like to see strict enough measures so that the environment should not happen.
The demonstrations come as Hungary's new government signals a major shift in policy. Prime Minister Peter Magyar has accused the previous administration of prioritising industrial investment over environmental protection and says those responsible must be held accountable. Mayor Laszlo Papp has rejected the criticism, arguing that environmental investigations and enforcement are the responsibility of national authorities, not the municipality. While Semcorp says it has launched a full investigation into the pollution, many protesters insist stricter regulations are no longer enough. Hungary became one of Europe's largest EV battery manufacturing hubs after attracting billions of euros in mainly Chinese and South Korean investment. But growing concerns over pollution, public health and environmental safety have now placed the industry under intense political scrutiny.
The European Union says it's moved its regional connectivity efforts to a new phase following high-level talks in Turkey, Azerbaijan and Armenia. Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos announced the progress after visiting the three countries this week. The initiative aims to strengthen transport, trade and energy links between Europe and Asia while supporting lasting peace in the South Caucasus. Nearly 50,000 people have been evacuated as fast-moving wildfires swept across Spain's northeastern Catalonia region. Fueled by strong winds, the blazes broke out near Girona and spread across around 10 communities. Authorities say the fires remain out of control, with military emergency units deployed to support firefighters. Officials have also urged people to avoid non-essential travel between Barcelona and Girona. Spain is enduring an exceptionally hot start to summer, with this week bringing the country's two hottest June days on record. Last summer, it was its worst wildfire season in more than 30 years, according to the Environment Ministry. And a dangerous heat wave disrupted 4th of July celebrations across the United States, forcing the cancellation or postponement of parades, concerts and fireworks displays. Temperatures above 38 degrees Celsius caused by a persistent heat dome also put power grids under pressure, with outages reported in New York and emergency conservation measures introduced in several regions. More than 185 million people were under heat alerts as officials warned of potentially life-threatening conditions. Authorities urged people celebrating outdoors over the holiday weekend to stay hydrated, seek shade and watch for signs of heat illness. As the United States celebrates the 250th anniversary of its independence on July 4th, one exhibition in New York is offering a journey through the nation's history. Sotheby's has brought together rare documents, iconic artworks and historic artifacts, tracing America's evolution over the past 2.5 centuries.
A rare copy of the Declaration of Independence, an original 13-star Revolutionary War flag, and an early portrait of George Washington are among the centerpieces of a new Sotheby's exhibition marking 250 years of American independence. Titled as a retrospective of the nation's history, the exhibition features paintings, photographs, historical documents, and cultural artifacts that explore how American identity has evolved since 1776. Visitors can also see works by renowned artists including Edward Hopper, Georgia O'Keeffe, Gordon Parks and Barclay Hendricks, reflecting both America's cultural achievements and its ongoing pursuit of equality and civil rights.
The exhibition is really a overview and a retrospective overview of 250 years of American independence. And here in this first gallery, The first chapter of the exhibition, Making of a Nation, is really putting together some iconic historical material. So we have an early portrait of George Washington painted by Gilbert Stuart. We have here in the background behind me a Revolutionary Star flag, 13-star flag that was carried in the Revolutionary Wars, as well as an incredible to-scale model of Independence Hall that was commissioned for the centennial exhibition of the American independence in 1876 in Philadelphia. We also have a Declaration of Independence, which is from the first 200 copies that were commissioned in 1820 by then Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. And those are the first 200 signed copies that were made after the original.
The exhibition runs in New York through July 16th, coinciding with nationwide celebrations of America's 250th Independence Day.
Pop superstar Taylor Swift has married American football player Travis Kelce in a star-studded ceremony at New York's Madison Square Garden. The couple tied the knot on Friday, ending a 3-year romance. The wedding was attended by family, friends and a host of celebrities. The celebration had been kept largely under wraps, with more than 1,000 guests reportedly invited for the Independence Day holiday weekend. And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.